Picture the richest person alive today. The billionaires, the names you know, the private jets, the islands, the fortunes so large they're hard to imagine. Now forget all of them. Because 700 years ago, a single man walked across a desert, carrying so much gold that he accidentally broke the economy of an entire region, just by being generous. He gave away so much wealth to so many people that the price of gold itself collapsed. And it stayed collapsed for 12 years. He wasn't a conqueror trying to loot a city. He wasn't a thief. He was a king on a religious journey, handing out gold to the poor along the road. And the sheer scale of his fortune was so far beyond anything the world had ever seen that historians, to this day, struggle to even put a number on it. His name was Mansa Musa, the ruler of an African empire most people today have never heard of. And by most measures, he was the wealthiest human being who has ever existed, richer than any king, any emperor, any modern billionaire. So, how does one man end up with that much gold? How do you get so rich that your spare change crashes a nation's economy? And why have so few people ever heard his name? To understand Mansa Musa, you first have to understand where his power came from. But to grasp how one man got this rich, you have to throw out almost everything you think you know about the medieval world. When most people imagine the 1300s, they think of Europe. Knights, castles, kings. But here's the truth they don't teach you. While Europe was tangled in civil wars, plagues, and poverty, the real centers of wealth and learning were somewhere else entirely. One of the greatest was in West Africa, an empire called Mali. And Mali was sitting on top of something the entire world wanted: gold. At a time when gold was the ultimate currency of power, the thing kings went to war over, the thing that decided the fate of nations, the Mali Empire controlled a staggering share of it. By some estimates, this single empire held close to half of all the gold in the known world. Think about what that means. Not half the gold in Africa, roughly half the gold on Earth as far as the medieval world knew it, flowing out of one kingdom. But gold was only half the story. Mali also controlled something just as valuable, something we forget about today because it's so cheap now: salt. In a world before refrigeration, salt was how you kept food from rotting. It was survival itself. And in parts of West Africa, salt was so precious it was traded ounce for ounce against gold. Mali sat at the crossroads of both: gold from the south, salt from the north. And every camel caravan crossing the Sahara had to pass through and pay the empire that controlled the roads. That was the machine. That was the source. A kingdom taxing the richest trade routes on the planet, sitting on half the world's gold. And in the year 1312, a new ruler inherited all of it. A man whose name would soon echo across 3 continents. And then, strangely, almost vanish from history. The story of how Mansa Musa came to power is itself a mystery. According to the accounts that survive, the king before him, a ruler obsessed with what lay beyond the horizon, assembled an enormous fleet of ships and sailed west into the open Atlantic, determined to find the ocean's far edge. He left Musa behind to govern in his absence. He never came back. And so Musa, the steward, became Musa the king. Now, some historians take this story at face value, a tale of a lost king swallowed by the sea. Others quietly suspect it's too convenient, and that Musa may have taken the throne by less romantic means, then crafted a story to explain it. We may never know the truth. But however he got there, Musa now controlled the wealthiest empire in the world. And he was, by all accounts, a brilliant ruler. He expanded Mali's borders dramatically, conquering new cities and absorbing the trade hubs of Timbuktu and Gao into his empire. He built an administration sophisticated enough to govern a territory that stretched across what is now a dozen modern countries. Under his rule, Mali didn't just stay rich, it became richer than ever. But here we have to be honest about the world Musa lived in, because his wealth had a darker foundation too. Like the powerful empires of his era, in Africa, Europe, and the Middle East alike, part of Mali's economy ran on the labor of enslaved people. The same caravans that carried his gold also carried human beings in chains. It's a part of the story that the legend of the Golden King often leaves out, and it deserves to be said plainly. For the first years of his reign, Musa ruled quietly, powerful at home, but almost unknown to the wider world beyond his borders. To the kingdoms of the Mediterranean, to Europe, to the Middle East, Mali was a rumor at most. A distant land somewhere past the Great Desert. That was about to change. Because Mansa Musa was a devout Muslim, and he was preparing to make a journey, one of the most sacred journeys in his faith, a pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca. He had no idea that this single trip was about to make him the most famous man in the world. In the year 1324, Mansa Musa set out from his capital on a journey of around 4,000 miles. But this was not a humble pilgrim walking alone with a staff. This was something the world had never witnessed before, and arguably has never witnessed since. When Mansa Musa traveled, he traveled as a moving city. The historical accounts describe a caravan of tens of thousands of people. Some sources say 60,000, though the true number is fiercely debated, and the highest figures are almost certainly exaggerated. Around him marched soldiers, officials, scholars, merchants, and servants, many of them dressed in fine Persian silk and brocade. Ahead of him walked 500 servants, and each one carried a staff of solid gold. Behind them came the camels, around 100 of them, and each animal was loaded with something close to 300 pounds of pure gold dust. Stop and do that math for a moment. 100 camels, 300 pounds of gold each, a river of gold, flowing across the Sahara, guarded by an army, announced by silk banners that could be seen from miles away. Now imagine you are an ordinary person in 1324, living in a town along his route. You've never seen anything richer than the local market. And then, on the horizon, you see this. An endless column of soldiers in silk and camels, led by a king who is literally handing out gold to anyone he passes. Because that's exactly what Mansa Musa did. He gave gold to the poor. He gave gold to officials. He gave gold to entire towns. He built a mosque, some accounts say, every single Friday of his journey. Wherever he went, he left a trail of gold behind him. And then he reached Cairo, one of the great cities of the world. And here, his generosity stopped being a wonder and became a catastrophe. Slow down here, because this is the part that turns legend into something almost unbelievable, except that it's documented. When Mansa Musa arrived in Cairo in the summer of 1324, the city was the beating heart of the medieval gold trade. If you wanted gold, you came to Cairo. The whole economy was balanced on its value. Mansa Musa stayed for 3 months. And during those 3 months, he and his enormous entourage gave away and spent gold on a scale the city had never absorbed before. He showered it on the Sultan's court. His thousands of followers poured it into the markets, buying everything in sight. Gold flowed out of his caravan and into the hands of ordinary Cairenes faster than anyone could comprehend. At first, the people of Cairo were overjoyed. Imagine a stranger arriving in your city and simply handing out fortunes. For a moment, everyone felt rich. But here's the hard truth about wealth that Mansa Musa accidentally taught the entire medieval world. When something becomes too common, it loses its value. So much gold flooded into Cairo, so quickly, that the gold itself began to crash. Its price collapsed. By some accounts, the value of gold in Egypt fell by around 20%. Everyone who held gold, every merchant, every family, every saver in the city, watched their wealth shrink, simply because one man had been too generous. Picture one Cairo merchant. For years, he's quietly built his savings the only way that's ever been safe, by storing gold. It's his retirement, his children's future, locked in a metal that never loses its worth. Then a king from beyond the desert spends 3 months flooding his city with the stuff, and the merchant watches, helpless, as the one thing he trusted to never lose value drops by a fifth, not because he did anything wrong, but because somewhere across town, a stranger was being kind. He is poorer this morning than he was yesterday, and there is nothing he can do about it. Now multiply that one man by an entire city, and it didn't bounce back in a week, or a month, or a year. An Arab historian who visited Cairo more than a decade later recorded that the market still had not recovered. 12 years. It took 12 years for the economy of one of the world's greatest cities to recover from the visit of a single tourist. Think about the scale of that. Not an army, not a war, not a disaster. One man, passing through, doing nothing but giving. And his generosity alone was powerful enough to wound a nation's economy for over a decade. There's a haunting detail here, too. On his way home, some accounts say Mansa Musa realized what he had done and tried to fix it. He began borrowing back gold from lenders in Cairo at high interest, trying to pull it out of circulation and lift its value again. The richest man on earth, trying to undo the damage of his own kindness. It wasn't enough. The wound was already done. This is the moment that made him a legend. Word of the Golden King spread out of Cairo like fire, across the Middle East, across North Africa, and eventually, all the way to Europe. The pilgrimage changed everything, not just for Mansa Musa, but for how the world saw Africa. When Musa finally returned home, he poured his wealth into something more lasting than gifts. He brought back architects, poets, and scholars from across the Islamic world. He transformed the city of Timbuktu into a glittering center of learning, with mosques, libraries, and a university that drew students from distant lands. For a time, Timbuktu became one of the most important intellectual hubs on the planet, a place where, it's said, books were worth more than almost anything else you could trade. And far away, in Europe, the stories kept growing. About 50 years after his journey, mapmakers in Spain created one of the most famous maps of the medieval age, the Catalan Atlas. And there, drawn onto the map of West Africa, sits a single regal figure on a throne, a crowned king, holding a glittering nugget of gold in his hand. That king is Mansa Musa, a man who had died decades earlier, on the far side of a desert, now permanently fixed in the imagination of Europe as the master of a land made of gold. And that image had consequences no one could have predicted, because Europe became obsessed. The legend of an African kingdom overflowing with gold lit a fire in the minds of European traders and kings. They wanted to find it. They wanted to reach the source. And in the centuries that followed, that hunger for African gold would help drive Portugal and Spain to send their ships down the African coast, the very voyages that opened the age of European exploration. So why, after all that, have so few people ever heard his name? Part of the answer is simply that history, for a long time, was written by the wrong people, and it quietly erased the empires it didn't want to remember. The story of a medieval African king richer than any European monarch didn't fit the version of the past that later centuries chose to tell. So Mansa Musa, once the most famous man in the world, slowly faded into a footnote. But the truth was always there, in the Arab chronicles, in the maps, in the ruins of Timbuktu, waiting. So that's Mansa Musa, a king so wealthy that giving became destruction, a man who broke an economy with kindness, who painted himself into the maps of Europe, and who helped, without ever knowing it, to set the entire age of exploration in motion. We love to measure the richest people in history with numbers, and people have tried with him. You'll see his fortune estimated at hundreds of billions. But the honest answer is that his wealth was so vast, so far outside the systems we use to count, that the numbers simply break. He isn't the richest man in history because of a figure on a list. He's the richest because his wealth bent the world around him. And maybe that's the real lesson hiding inside all that gold. Mansa Musa had so much that it stopped behaving like money and started behaving like weather, flooding cities, crashing markets, reshaping continents, whether he meant it to or not. He proved that wealth, past a certain point, isn't really about what you own anymore. It's a force. And like any force that large, it changes everything it touches, in ways no single person can control. The richest man who ever lived didn't conquer the world with armies. He did it by opening his hands. And the world has never quite recovered from what fell out.